Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And it is another hot one in Los Angeles. Again, we are touching, I'm sure we're touching 100, even though, they're telling us 94, 95, whatever. It's the same story every day. It starts out being, oh, the high today will be 91. Then it's like 95. Then it's like 97. Then it's on the thermometer down the road. It's 100 degrees. Show a picture of that real quick. There's the thermometer down the road. And as promised yesterday, I'm going to show a couple clips of some trees in the area. I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over in all these video shots. So I don't know if I'm going to even have talking or sound on any of them, but I'll just quickly do a little, have a little clip of the dead trees in Los Angeles, or specifically where I'm at, Pasadena, Altadena area. Yeah, it doesn't, nobody's noticing right now, but when many of these trees go completely brown, and who knows how long that's going to take. It could be this year, later this year, next year, when a lot of the trees are totally dead and totally brown. Perhaps people will be like, oh my God, what's happening? Or maybe not. Anyways.
Bad things if enough of these leaves burn and die off. So the tops of this tree, the top of the tree is, all the leaves are burnt on the top of this tree. I don't know if you can see that. This is an oak tree. A lot of the top leaves and top branches are burned. It's not fall yet. You maybe might see this in October or November here in Los Angeles, but definitely not in July. It's alarming. This is a good example of trees being like half burnt. These leaves are burnt, dying. Does that mean the whole plant is dying? Another great example of a tree with a lot of dead leaves on it. A lot of dead and dying branches. I don't know what kind of tree this is. Here's another one. This is quite frightening. This looks like, fall colors, but this is just burnt. Pine trees with a lot of dead leaves on them. Is the whole tree dead? No, but it's not looking good. 1, 2. Here on the corner, here's number 3 behind it. This pine tree doesn't look in good shape. Again, all of these trees, half the leaves are dead, the branches are dying, every single one.
So there you go, a little investigative journalism out and about, on the scene, like a love machine. I'm just going to read some articles now. Again, not the first one, but most of these have to do with heat. Of course, I had all the articles lined up to read today, and as soon as I open my Truth Out email up, there's a new article from Darja Mail, but I think I'm going to have to leave that for tomorrow because there's just not enough time to read it today. So I'll get to the Darja Mail piece tomorrow, and I have something else I want to read tomorrow as well. This from thebigwobble.org. Japan evacuates 36,000 as powerful Typhoon Jongdari takes aim after more than 300 dead and 40,000 hospitalized from floods and landslides. I believe this is the typhoon that sent my friend in another direction on her vacation. A powerful typhoon is heading for Japan after one of the country's deadliest months ever, after more than 300 people died and nearly 40,000 hospitalized from floods and a crippling heat wave. Typhoon Jongdari, packing winds of up to 180 kilometers an hour, is forecast to make landfall on the country's main island on Saturday night or early Sunday, according to Japan's meteorological agency. Authorities have issued evacuation orders to western areas still devastated by floods and landslides. According to AFP.com, the storm, currently some 250 kilometers south of Tokyo, is expected to barrel towards the western Chugoku region Sunday, where record rainfall earlier this month unleashed flooding and landslides, killing around 220 people and leaving more than 4,000 survivors still living in temporary shelters. The weather agency warned of heavy rain, landslides, strong winds, and high waves, and urged people to consider early evacuation. We want people, especially in the downpour-hit regions, to pay close attention to evacuation advisories, meteorological agency official Minako Sakurai told reporters. The western city of Shobara in Hiroshima Prefecture issued an evacuation order to some 36,400 residents as a precautionary measure, officials said. Japan is just getting walloped, absolutely walloped. But then the whole eastern hemisphere, I guess you want to call it, of the globe has been getting hit very, very hard. We've just had typhoon after typhoon, floods and storms over and over. For the last 12 months, it seems like China, Indonesia, India, Japan have just been getting rocked. At what point does this start taking a serious toll on that part of the world? Enough of a toll that things start to look very, very different there. Moving on to something from a blog by Barrington Stewart. Thermogeddon, when the earth gets too hot for humans. According to a recent study, parts of the earth could start to become uninhabitable within a century. Surely it cannot be true. It is the late 23rd century. Houston, Tel Aviv, Shanghai, and many other once bustling cities are ghost towns. No one lives in Louisiana or Florida anymore. And vast swaths of Africa, China, Brazil, India, and Australia are no-go zones too. Oh, this is so, they're talking about the late 23rd century, so they're a couple hundred years from now. Okie dokie. That's because in all of these places, it gets hot and humid enough to kill anyone who cannot find an air-conditioned shelter. This is the nightmare scenario outlined in a study published earlier this year. If we carry on as we are, it claimed, in as little as a century, a few small areas might start to get so hot in summer that no one could survive without air conditioning. I cannot believe that they're still continuing to say 2100 or in a century. I cannot believe that they're still doing that. This is just, it makes me upset because they need to tell people the truth. I knew just from basic physics that there would be a point at which heat and humidity would become intolerable, and it didn't. So let's just, listen to this article and everything that they're talking about, all the scenarios, just slap the date 2030 or 2040 on that. And that's what they're talking about. Not 200 years, 20 years or less, 10 years or less. I knew just from basic physics that there would be a point at which heat and humidity would become intolerable, and it didn't seem that anyone had looked at that from a climate change perspective, said Stephen Sherwood, an atmospheric scientist at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. When you look at the data, it becomes pretty clear that it wouldn't take as much climate change as people seem to think to hit this. All right. Getting closer to the truth. This is an astounding claim. Scientists have long warned that climate change will have serious consequences: big sea level rises, floods, droughts, more extreme weather, extinctions, and so on. But if Sherwood and co-author Matthew Huber of Purdue University in Indiana are right, huge parts of the planet could effectively become uninhabitable. So new scientists set out to discover if their claim really is plausible. What is the limit of human survival, and could global warming really lead to this limit being exceeded in some areas? Even today, heat waves can kill tens of thousands of people. Yes, that's right now. In France alone, more than 14,800 people died of heat stroke in 2003. So yeah, we have a range of 14,000 to up to 70,000 from that heat wave. It's a pretty big difference. Hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods might get all the headlines, but in the US, heat waves claim more lives each year than all of these phenomena combined. The victims of heat waves are usually the most vulnerable, the sick, the elderly, and the very young. As heat waves have become more severe, though, the proportion of the population dying will rise. Even healthy adults acclimatized to heat will succumb if it stays too hot and too humid for too long. To function normally, we have to maintain a core body temperature of around 37 C, and if it rises above about 42 C, we die. Exactly why is still not understood. The body diverts blood to the skin to try to cool it off, which cuts the blood supply to the gut. One theory is that the bacterial toxins from damaged guts start leaking into the bloodstream, eventually causing multiple organ failure. What is clear is that to prevent our core temperature rising too high, our skin temperature must not exceed 35 C for more than a few hours. In dry climates, sweating will cool the skin sufficiently, even in temperatures of 45 C or more. But in humid climates, where the air is nearly saturated with moisture, sweating makes little difference. So temperature alone is a very poor guide to what people can survive. A better indicator is the wet bulb temperature. This is the temperature that a mercury thermometer wrapped in a wet cloth would record. It is a measure of both heat and humidity and reflects the temperature you could lower your skin to by sweating. Even fit and healthy people couldn't survive sustained wet bulb temperatures above 35 C, said Sherwood and Huber. This heat stress limit applies to even people sitting naked in the shade next to a fan. Without air conditioning or access to cooler or less humid places, they will die. The claim that people cannot survive a wet bulb temperature of 35 C or more for long is reasonable, says Chris Byrne, an exercise physiologist who specializes in human thermoregulation at the University of Exeter, UK. At any temperature above that, we switch from a state where we're losing heat from the skin to the environment to one where the environment imposes a heat load through the skin, he says, heat forcing through your skin. There's no doubt that if those conditions arise, you're probably looking at a lethal situation for the vast majority of the population. You're looking at a lethal situation for the mass majority of the population. To find out whether this heat stress limit is ever exceeded today, Sherwood and Huber looked at patterns of temperature and humidity around the world during the past decade. In a few places, such as Death Valley, California, temperatures can hit 50 C or more. There is far less variability in wet bulb temperatures, though, as the highest temperatures tend to occur in deserts with low humidity. At present, annual maximum wet bulb temperatures almost never exceed 31 C. There is a reason for this, a kind of natural thermostat. The hotter and more humid air becomes, the more likely it is to rise and be replaced by cooler air. That's because humid air is less dense than dry air of the same temperature and pressure, as water molecules weigh less than those of oxygen and nitrogen. That's what's more, when humid air starts to rise, the water vapor begins to condense and release latent heat, warming the air and making it rise even hotter. In weather jargon, hot and humid air is likely to be unstable, often leading to thunderstorms that cool things down. That means that no matter where you go around the world, the wet bulbs top out at around 30 or 31 C, says Sherwood. But instability is relative. Air rises only if it is less dense than surrounding air. So if the entire tropics get warmer and more humid, air will have to be somewhat hotter and more humid before it starts to rise. Global warming, in other words, will crank up the thermostat. To work out how wet bulb temperatures will change as the world warms, Sherwood and Huber turned to a computer model. All right. The take-home figures for every 1 C that the global average temperature rises, maximum wet bulb temperatures will rise about 0.75 C. Other researchers see no problem with this prediction. The climate modeling here is very solid, said Peter Stott of the Met Office Hadley Centre in Exeter, UK, which researches climate change. Having chatted to a couple of colleagues about this, we think what they are saying seems entirely reasonable and consistent with what we would expect. The upshot is that if global average temperatures rise by 7°C, ooh, the maximum wet bulb temperatures in a few places will start to exceed the 35°C barrier. Really, at 7°C? Okay, for a few periods or hours or days. Are you sure you guys are scientists? Of course, heat stress won't suddenly start to be the problem only at this point. Rather, as heat and humidity slowly rise from today's levels, heat waves will kill more and more people. Their economic impact will also climb as physical labor outdoors or in buildings with poor air conditioning becomes increasingly difficult, nay, impossible. With global warming of 7°C, however, the heat and humidity would start to become intolerable in some places. At 7°C, everybody's laying on the ground dead. That's what it is, Jesus. We'll be seeing migrations of hot and humid countries where people can't survive the heat wave, says Sherwood. There will be migrations out of countries where people cannot survive the heat waves. If the global average temperature rises by 12°C, half of the land inhabited today would become too hot to live in. This is getting funny. The uninhabitable regions are likely to be those with the highest heat stress today, including the Amazon basin, India, parts of Africa, China, Australia, and the southeastern U.S. That would have a nightmarish outcome. In theory, people in affected regions could adapt. I mean, people are having a hard time staying alive right now at supposedly less than 2°C. I don't understand what they're talking about. The cost of running air conditioning constantly would be unaffordable for many individuals and businesses. Or how about power grids totally collapsing? Most livestock, for instance, would perish unless kept in air-conditioned barns at all times. Even worse, a prolonged power cut could cause mass fatalities. That's a scary scenario, said Sherwood. Seems likely that most people would move to cooler climes, leading to conflict over land and resources. The scenario they've laid out is pretty devastating. It's a much more serious and catastrophic outcome than people have identified before in the context of heat-related mortality, said Patrick Kinney, director of the Climate and Health Program, Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health in New York. It seems to be based on sound reasoning and good models and data. People have already thought about ill health effects of climate change, but nobody that I know of has considered there being a threshold above which it basically becomes impossible for people to live. Kinney said we should be cautious about quantitative statements such as half the inhabited land. But the fact that any amount of the world would become uninhabitable and we don't know the exact proportion, that to me is alarming, he says. So there seems little reason to doubt that if the world gets warm enough, parts of it will start to exceed the heat stress limit. The big question then is whether the planet will get warm enough. Could there really be a global temperature rise of 7°C or more? The short answer is yes, in the long term. Remember that Sam Carana from Arctic News predicts a possible 8 to 10°C in 10 years. How much of the world will warm depends on two things. How much more carbon dioxide we pump into the atmosphere and how much warming the CO2 produces, also known as climate sensitivity. According to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, every doubling of CO2 in the atmosphere will raise the temperature by between 1.9 and 4.5°C, with 3°C being the most likely value. How much the world will warm also depends on how much truthful data we can get from the people telling us all of this stuff. If climate sensitivity is as low as 1.9°C, then it would take centuries for the planet to warm by 7°C. Even if we continue pumping out lots of CO2, on the other hand, if climate sensitivity is as high as 4.5°C, we hit the 7°C point within a century. If we carry on as we are, although this still could be avoided as long as we slash emissions soon enough. Heroic efforts. The catch is that the IPCC's estimates of climate sensitivity are based only on fast feedback back processes that are relatively easy to model on computers. They exclude slower processes such as the ocean switching from absorbing CO2 to emitting it, or the release of methane from thawing permafrost. Studies of Earth's past suggest that actual sensitivity could be higher than computer models predict, with a few suggesting it could be as high as 7C. If long-term sensitivity is high, it will be much harder to avoid big temperature rises over the next few centuries. Most of the discussion has been around the 21st century, but warming isn't going to stop in 2100 unless our emissions have fallen almost to zero by then, or how about by next year? And that would require heroic effort, said Sherwood. If you consider that carbon releases might be a little higher than the most likely value, and that the climate might be quite sensitive to inputs of energy, it's not too hard to get up to 10, 12, or even 15C by the 23rd century. The danger is that if we pump too much CO2 into the atmosphere, large temperature rises might become inevitable, even if all human greenhouse gases emissions cease. We need to think about how to ensure that a large fraction of the fossil fuels are simply left in the ground, said Sherwood. That's going to take a change in direction that many people are not yet seriously taking on board. Even fewer are taking on board the idea that parts of the planet could become too hot for humans to survive. If there was a fault in Sherwood and Huber's reasoning, however, none of the researchers contacted by New Scientist could identify it. Scientists tend to be conservative. We stick to what we know and avoid speculating about things that are hard to pin down, said Sherwood. I think heat stress is an important impact of climate change that we've missed, and there may be others, particularly with large but possible warmings. All right, thanks, scientists. Sorry we missed that. How did mammals survive? In a warmer world, will some areas really get too hot for humans to survive? One way to try to answer this question is to look at past warm periods, such as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum 56 million years ago. Before the PETM, Earth was already as much as 10°C warmer than it is now. Then, over 20,000 years, the temperature shot up by a further 5 to 9°C. There were no humans around then, of course, but there were plenty of other animals. Is there evidence that heat stress was a major problem for them? Some mammals have core body temperatures as high as 40°C, so in theory, they should be able to survive levels of heat and humidity that would kill humans. Even so, if calculations by Stephen Sherwood at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, and Matthew Huber at Purdue University in Indiana are right, see main story, in some tropical regions during the PETM, heat stress should have become a problem for even mammals well adapted to hot, humid conditions. Fossil records are very patchy, so it is unclear if heat stress drove any mammals from the hottest and most humid areas. It does appear, however, that many mammals become smaller during this time, with some having in mass. One proposed explanation for this is that foliage became less nutritious and digestible because of high CO2 levels. But a study published earlier this year concluded that other factors may have played a role, as some carnivores shrank too. One explanation is that heat stress drove the evolution of smaller mammals. Small animals have a higher surface area relative to their internal volume, so they can cool themselves more efficiently. We think this provides a nice way of explaining what has long been known to paleontologists, which is that mammals get smaller in warmer climates, said Sherwood. All right. I'll link that article below. I find it somewhat laughable. Moving on to something from Inside Climate News. This summer's heat waves could be the strongest climate signal yet. Earth's global warming fever spiked to deadly new highs across the northern hemisphere this summer, and we're feeling the results. Extreme heat is now blamed for hundreds of deaths. Droughts threaten food supplies. Wildfires have raced through neighborhoods in western United States, Greece, and as far north as the Arctic Circle. At sea, record and near-record warm oceans have sent soggy masses of air surging landward, fueling extreme rainfall and flooding in Japan and the eastern U.S. In Europe, the Baltic Sea is so warm that potentially toxic blue-green algae is spreading across its surface. There shouldn't be any doubt that some of the deadliest of this summer's disasters, including flooding in Japan and wildfires in Greece, are fueled by weather extremes linked to global warming, said Corinne Lacquere, director of the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research at the University of East Anglia. We know very well that global warming is making heat waves longer, hotter, and more frequent, she said. The evidence from having extreme heat waves around the world is really compelling. It's very indicative that global warming background is causing, or at least contributing to these events, she said. The challenges created by global warming are becoming more evident even in basic infrastructure, much of which was built on the assumption of cooler climate. In these latest heat waves, railroad tracks have bent in the rising temperatures, airport runways have cracked, power plants from France to Finland have had to power down because their cooling sources became too warm. Wow, we're seeing that many things are not built to withstand the heat levels we are seeing now, Lacquere said. Or is it Lacquere? Penn State climate scientist Michael Mann said this summer's extreme weather fits into a pattern he identified with other researchers in a study published last year. The jet stream's north-south meanders have been unusually stationary, leading to persistent heat waves and droughts in some areas and days of rain and flooding in others. He said, our work last year shows that this sort of pattern has become more common because of human-caused climate change, and in particular, amplified Arctic warming. Deadly heat waves from Canada to Japan. There are many ways to define a heat wave. Oops. Oh, Lori. No. There are many ways to define a heat wave, but the conditions in many areas of the planet this summer have been universally recognized as severe, said Boram Lee, a senior research scientist with the World Meteorological Organization. From around the end of June, many countries in Europe, Asia, and North America have issued severe warnings, she said. The UK, US, Japan, and Korea all had long-lasting warnings. Japan declared the recent heat wave a natural disaster, she added. In Europe, scientists on Friday released a real-time attribution study of the heat wave that has baked parts of northern Europe since June. They found that global warming caused by greenhouse gas pollution made the ongoing heat wave 5 times more likely in Denmark and twice as likely in Ireland. Near the Arctic, it's absolutely exceptional and unprecedented. This is a warning, said French heatwave expert Robert Votard, who worked on the study for world weather attribution. The group previously determined that global warming made last summer's Lucifer heat wave in southern Europe 10 times more likely. In many places, people are preparing for the past or present climate, but in this summer is the future, he said. The geographic scope and persistence of the European heat wave stands out. An area stretching from the British Isles to Eastern Europe and north to the Arctic is bright red on European heat wave and drought maps. Covering an area about as big as Texas and California combined, crop damage is being reported in parts of Norway through Sweden, Denmark, and the Baltics. Depending on the conditions during the next month, more widespread crop failures could raise global food prices. We are talking about 2018. In mid-July, temperatures reached all-time record highs above the Arctic Circle, around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and hovered in the 80s for weeks at a time in the Norwegian glacier area that Lars Holger Pilo studies. The average temperature has been 9 degrees Fahrenheit above average for the past 30 days. I have been working here since 2006, and we have snow records going back 60 years, and there's nothing like what we're seeing right now, said Pilo, part of the team of ice archaeologists who are measuring the snow and ice loss and recovering historic artifacts like arrowheads and skis that were buried for millennia. I'm watching with a mixture of excitement and dread. I try not to think too much about it and stick to what we do, which is rescuing the artifacts coming out of the warming. I call it dark archaeology, he said. I look at the ice and I think, dead man walking. Norwegian Meteorological Institute climate scientist Ketil Isaacson said the extreme situation in Scandinavia fits the pattern of global warming. There are so many extremes now from all over the world. We're seeing a very common pattern. For me, this is a strong climate signal. Ice that's several thousand years old melting in a matter of just a few weeks, he said. Isaacson is finalizing some studies that find heat is penetrating between 30 and 50 meters deep into the ground through cracks in the Rocky Mountains around Norway's fjords. Instead of just a thin skin of permafrost melting, these mountains could fall apart in large chunks when autumn rains start, threatening coastal communities with tsunamis. Wow. Now we have a new extreme this summer. This will probably affect slope stability, and we can expect mass movement events like debris flows and landslides in late summer, he said. He said the studies help define new geologic hazard areas with knowledge that some of the melted mountains will see wholesale slope failure when strong rains hit. Based on the information, emergency managers are developing new early warning systems. Holy moly. The increasing influence of global warming. About the same time, that Norwegian researchers were uncovering ancient tools in the Arctic tundra this summer, heat records were being set in many other parts of the world. Temperatures in Algeria reached 124 degrees Fahrenheit, setting a new record for the African continent. A few weeks earlier, a city in Oman is believed to have broken a global record when it went more than 24 hours with temperatures never falling below 108 degrees. Japan set a national record of 106 amid a heat wave that has been blamed for more than 80 deaths. Regional Western heat events are becoming so pronounced that some climate scientists see the current extremes in the U.S. as a climate inflection point where the global warming signal stands out above the natural background of climate variability. In mid-July, a week of temperatures in the high 80s and up to 96 degrees Fahrenheit in normally cool Quebec killed more than 50 people. And while that heat wave was waning, another one was building in Asia, where the Japan Meteorological Agency said that 200 of its 927 stations topped 35 degrees Celsius on July 15th. That's 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Since then, at least 80 people have died and thousands have gone to hospitals with heat-related ailments. There are irrefutable scientific evidences that climate change alters both the intensity and frequency of such extreme phenomena as heat waves, and ongoing efforts are dedicated to understand how big the impact of man-made climate change is, said WMO's Forum Lee. That's good. Across social media, climate scientists are responding with a collective "We warned about this," posting links of 10 years worth of studies that have consistently been projecting increases in deadly heat waves. If anything, the warnings may have been understated. The rise in heat waves is stronger than many climate models project, said World Weather Attribution's Gert Jan van Oldenburg, who measured a record high temperature outside his office in the Netherlands on July 26th, then tweeted that global warming is making the heat there 20 times more likely than in 1900. Hot and dry weather also makes forests more flammable. In Greece, after a month of record and near-record heat, flames ran wild through the community of Mati on July 23rd, killing at least 80 people. On July 26th, a blaze in Northern California jumped the Sacramento River and spawned fire tornadoes, forcing the evacuation of parts of Reading, a city of 92,000. And in Germany, residents of southern Berlin awoke Friday to the sight of smoke on the horizon, an event that will also become more common in that part of the world. I didn't know there were fires in Germany. Although climate scientists are reluctant to link any one particular fire to climate change, there is plenty of scientific evidence showing how heat-trapping greenhouse gases contribute to increased fire danger. Weather is a product of the climate system. We are drastically altering that system, and all the weather we observe now is the product of that human-altered climate system. One result is an increase in the frequency, size, and severity of large fire events. University of California Merced researcher Leroy Westerling wrote on Twitter, University of Arizona climate researcher and geographer Kevin Anchukaitis publicized several wildfire studies from the last 10 years that all show how and why global warming is making fires bigger, more destructive, and long-lasting. Is climate change the only factor influencing wildland fire? No, of course not, but climate change is influencing area burned and fuel aridity, he wrote. Tyndall Center Director LaQuerre said she faulted some media for failing to connect global warming to the current global heat wave. You don't say. The signal is very clear, she said, adding that some of the early stories about the deadly fire in Greece almost seem to downplay a link to climate change. On Friday, the WMO released a new statement highlighting the links between global warming and wildfires and reminding readers that the heat is drying out forests and making them more susceptible to burn. This is a long article, but I think we're almost there. We're almost done. There's also still reluctance to link individual extreme flood events with global warming, despite plenty of scientific evidence that today's global atmosphere, 1 degree Celsius above, warmer than 100 years ago, holds much more moisture than can be delivered by regional storm systems. Those warnings were not enough to help more than 200 people who died in Japan in late June amid a series of record-setting torrential rainstorms. Regional weather patterns certainly played a role, but ocean currents and an atmosphere juiced up by global warming likely boosted moisture for the storm. 2 years ago, the Alfred Wegener Institute climate researcher Hugh Wang showed how climate change is strengthening ocean currents that carry moisture from the ocean towards Japan. The research showed the currents have been getting stronger and warmer in tandem with rising atmospheric CO2 levels. Eventually, the heat is released to the atmosphere during storms as wind or rain or both. Yang said his continuing research is finding similar evidence that a powerful current near Japan may be a super hotspot under global warming. As the current strengthens, it will release its energy as water vapor, fuel for storms that cause extra heavy rains in Japan and other parts of Asia, he said. In the U.S., June flooding in the Midwest fits a detected pattern of increasing extreme rainfalls in that region. And in July, 10 million people in the East, from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, were under various types of flood warnings, with soggy air sloshing from the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean over the overheated north of eastern Atlantic toward the coast. What can we do about it? In some cases, the scientific warnings about global warming impacts have resonated. At least parts of Europe are better prepared for heat waves now than they were in 2003, when extreme heat killed up to 70,000 people, said Le Curé. More cities know what they need to do to protect vulnerable people in an extreme event, she said, but they lack the money to do things like building more cooling shelters or cooling core urban areas with green spaces and ponds. Maybe this is an opportunity in a grim way to prepare for events that will be longer and hotter, she said. It's not just a case of holding our breath for 3 weeks and saying, it's soon winter. It's time to push and protect vulnerable people and infrastructure. To prepare for the new normal, people must act in the next 5 to 10 years, said environmental scientist Kara Augustenborg, chairperson of Friends of the Earth Europe. We have to consider how every new infrastructure, agricultural or development project from now on will be impacted by climate change. We need to look at a planned retreat from coastlines, developing further inland, building infrastructure that is more resilient to the effects of climate change, such as sea level rise and temperature extremes. How about a planned retreat from capitalism? How about that? We've had several years now where airport runways have melted on extremely hot days, she continued. How about a planned retreat from nuclear power? That's something we need to factor into future construction, as it's a problem that won't go away. Society also needs to think about food security, she said. That's what I really lose sleep over, she said. Our available arable land is declining now as our global population is booming. It doesn't take much in the way of extreme weather to have a major impact on food supplies. I like those words, planned retreat. We could actually layer that on a lot of what we should be doing is a planned retreat from industrial civilization. Straight up, a planned retreat from technology, a planned retreat from militarism, et cetera, et cetera. Ad infinitum, ad nauseum. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.